All right, well, by now, everyone has heard the term Karen, a pejorative for entitled white women who humiliate or make unreasonable demands of others. Case in point, the woman who harassed the black birdwatcher in Central Park. But the question we raise, should journalists themselves be using the term Karen? You've seen the term in headlines, and it has recently appeared in opinion pieces in both the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. The current face of Karen is Amy Cooper, the woman who called police after black birdwatcher Christian Cooper asked her to leash her dog.
There is an African-American man. I'm in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog.
But there are plenty of other women who fit the bill, like these two instances when women got upset when asked to wear masks in a grocery store.
That man harassed me for not wearing a mask. I have a breathing problem.
Okay, we get the picture. Women of privilege, although there is no comparable term for the Kevins who behave that way too.
Don't have a run-in with the law and don't resist arrest. It won't be a problem.
At any rate, the term Karen has prompted some journalistic debate. Hadley Freeman writes in The Guardian that it's sexist, ageist, and classist. The Washington Post Karen Atiyah fired back, saying the meme is not racist or sexist. In fact, Atiyah went so far as to tweet that white women are lucky that we are just calling them Karens and not calling for revenge. For that, Atiyah herself was called racist, among other things. Which brings me back to an old journalistic proverb. You can think it, but don't say it. If you say it, don't write it down. And if you write it, say it wasn't me. All right, listen, I get this. There's something even slightly amusing about this. And, you know, white privileged women are an easy target. But it's, to use Mark Jerkowitz's old phrase, it's a slippery slope because, you know, you could categorize whole groups of people by that. You wouldn't call, you know, undocumented immigrants Jose's. I mean, certainly journalists wouldn't. But, you know, using those kinds of pejoratives and slurs or in everyday discourse, let's face it. But and I have no problem putting it in a headline, and I have no problem with, you know, raising the issue and explaining what it is. I have no problem with that because I, frankly, was not familiar with the term. But just to drop it as a journalist, to use it as if that's a legitimate term, no.
Well, you know, I agree with you to a certain extent. I think that the reason that it's used so widely is not because it's just kind of this fun thing to use, but because you can say a lot in just one word,
yeah.
Right? And whether it's in a headline, whether it's a lead-in, you can just say, Karen. Everyone knows exactly what the story is about, and that's what you do in journalism, right? You figure out how to say a lot of things in fewer words. So I get that, but you know, I never gave this a whole lot of thought, and now that there's been this debate around the word, I think what we probably should do is just stay away from it. We don't have to use it. You can always say, you know, another incident in a grocery store parking lot, you know, with, you know, racist comments being uttered, whatever it is. There are ways that we always used to talk about these kinds of situations, perhaps not as often as we do now, but there are ways we used to talk about them without using the word Karen. So I think, you know, it's a shortcut. And if there's a problem with it, we don't have to use a shortcut.
I would love to get a linguist on the case here because it's a fascinating linguistic study because this is a piece of slang and it has evolved, I feel like, even over the last 6 months. I mean, you know, 6 months ago, my kids were joking that I was a Karen if I sort of said something bossy and it was, you know, kind of wrapped up in like, you know, bossy suburban mom. I think, you know, that idea is caught up, I think, in some sort of messages of privilege for sure. But I feel like over the last couple of months, it's really the term Karen has evolved into something that's much more racially charged in the sense that it's really accusing someone of a racist viewpoint as well. So it's been interesting to see as our culture is grappling with different ideas, even the term Karen is changing and evolving with it, which is probably goes back to the idea that it's a dangerous term to just throw into a story because it doesn't have a solid meaning. Mm-hmm. The meaning's changing.
Yeah, look, this is out in the vernacular. There's no doubt about it. I heard Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley use the terms Karen and Becky, which is another similar term, in an interview just the other day. And if someone as prominent as her does, and I'm writing a story about her, I might quote that. Otherwise, I agree with Dan, it's best if journalists try to stay away from this kind of slangy shorthand. And again, I'm sorry to be a broken record here, but it's the Twitterization of journalism. This is Twitter lingo. The ultra shorthand, that's very characteristic of Twitter. And underneath it all, a very serious issue. The barely concealed or completely unconcealed hostility toward people of color, white people who feel free to just express it in a very vulgar fashion in a public place. What that woman, Amy Cooper, did could have gotten that poor guy killed.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that when we get distracted by all these sort of trivial linguistic issues or semi-trivial.
And that's the point. Yes, Amy Cooper definitely could have gotten Christian Cooper killed. Now, Becky was a term that I was aware of, and I think that Karen has evolved to the shortcut that we know it to be, or being used by folks in addition to journalists, because it actually means just what you all defined, but someone caught on video doing the act. So that's a Karen. That's part of the Karen description. Having said that, we journalists are known for taking the terminology, Jon may be right, from Twitter and elsewhere, and adopting it as our own. Obamacare is a good example. I mean, I just could come up with millions of them, but there are shortcuts all over the place. I think it's good to have a discussion about when and how we use it, but if your audience is familiar with it and is using it and you define it, I don't know. I think the sentence is going to have to be blah, blah, who did so-and-so was called Karen by whoever the folks are who are complaining about her or whatever. So it's going to end up in the copy. So maybe what we're discussing is how it should be used, which is perfectly legitimate for journalists to be having a conversation about.